He stood frozen at gate C12, his fingers nervously drumming against the worn fabric of his jeans. Staff Sergeant Tom Hansen had faced IEDs in Kandahar and firefights in Helmand Province, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the anxiety coursing through his veins at this moment. 2 years. 731 days since he'd looked into those loyal amber eyes. Would Taylor even remember him? The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. The separation had been cruel. Military necessity, they'd called it. Hansen could still feel the weight of Taylor's head against his palm that final day, the German shepherd's warm breath on his wrist as he whispered promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "I'll come back for you, I swear it." Words that had haunted him through sleepless nights ever since. The flight status change to arrived, and Hansen's heart slammed against his ribcage. A flood of passengers emerged through the gate, and then, there she was. The distinctive black and tan coat, graying slightly around the muzzle now. Taylor rounded the corner with her escort, ears perked forward, scanning the crowd. Hansen dropped to one knee, his voice catching as he called her name. The moment suspended in time. Would those eyes light with recognition, or would they pass over him like a stranger? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Thomas Tom Hansen hadn't always planned on a military career. Growing up in the small town of Millfield, Ohio, he dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. His father, a Vietnam veteran, had quietly hoped his son would choose a different path. But when the Twin Towers fell during Tom's senior year of high school, something shifted inside him. By 20, he'd traded college applications for boot camp, and by 25, he'd risen to staff sergeant with 2 tours in Iraq already behind him. Tall and lean with sandy brown hair perpetually cut to regulation, Hansen carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen the worst the world had to offer, but chose to believe in its goodness anyway. His commanding officers noted his exceptional empathy and attention to detail, qualities that would eventually lead him to the military working dog program. What no one anticipated was how those same qualities would forge a bond that transcended the typical handler-canine relationship. Taylor came to the program with a reputation. A purebred German shepherd with a bloodline tracing back to dogs that had served in Desert Storm, she possessed an uncanny ability to detect explosives at distances that stunned even veteran trainers. But that talent came with complications. 2 handlers had already requested transfers, citing her stubborn independence and refusal to bond. "She's calculating," the head trainer warned Hansen on their first meeting. "Watches everything, trusts nothing." At 3 years old, with a glossy black coat and intelligent amber eyes, Taylor stood alert in her kennel, assessing Hansen with a gaze that seemed to penetrate his very soul. Unlike her previous handlers, Hansen didn't try to assert immediate dominance. Instead, he simply sat outside her kennel for hours, reading aloud from his dog-eared copy of The Old Man and the Sea, letting her grow accustomed to his voice, his scent, his presence. Emily Donner entered Hansen's life much later, a field medic stationed at Fort Benning whose steady hands had patched up his unit after an ambush outside Kabul. With auburn hair typically pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, Emily possessed a warmth that began to thaw the ice that had formed around Hansen's heart during his separation from Taylor. And then there was Molly Oliver, a United Airlines flight attendant whose connection to military service ran bone deep, though few passengers who received her cheerful cabin service ever suspected the mission that drove her after hours. The training facility at Fort Benning smelled of wet concrete and the particular musk of working dogs. Hansen's first official day with Taylor began with a tension that could have been cut with a knife. The other handlers watched with a mixture of sympathy and barely concealed amusement. "Drawn the short straw with that one," Staff Sergeant Miller muttered as Hansen approached Taylor's kennel. "She's got the nose of a bloodhound but the attitude of a cat." Hansen said nothing, simply nodding acknowledgement. He'd spent the previous night reading Taylor's file cover to cover. The impressive detection rates, the behavioral notes, the terse comments from previous handlers. Between the lines, he'd read something else. Intelligence frustrated by human incomprehension. That first week tested every ounce of Hansen's patience. Taylor would follow basic commands impeccably during structured training, then deliberately ignore him during free time, maintaining a calculated distance. The breakthrough came unexpectedly on the 8th day. A thunderstorm rolled across the base just after midnight. Hansen, awakened by the crash of thunder, heard it, a high-pitched whine from Taylor's kennel. Military protocol dictated that handlers maintain professional distance, but something in that sound bypassed logic entirely. Hansen found himself padding barefoot across the cold floor to Taylor's kennel. The proud German Shepherd was pressed against the back wall, trembling. Without overthinking, Hansen unlocked the gate and sat down on the floor, not reaching for her, just being present. After what seemed like hours, Taylor edged forward and, in a move that surprised them both, pressed her body against Hansen's side. "It's okay, girl," he whispered, finally allowing himself to stroke her fur. "We've all got something that scares us." When the training officer found them the next morning, Taylor's head was resting in Hansen's lap, both sound asleep. "Something's changed," the head trainer observed 3 weeks later, watching Hansen and Taylor navigate the obstacle course with newfound synchronicity. Hansen didn't explain about the thunderstorm. Some bonds were forged in moments too private to share. Their first deployment came sooner than expected. A team in the Helmand province had lost their explosives detection dog to heat stroke, and Hansen and Taylor, despite being relatively new partners, had scored highest in their final training assessments. "You ready for this?" Hansen asked Taylor the night before they shipped out, scratching behind her ears. Taylor's response was a steadfast gaze that would become familiar in the months ahead. The mountains of Afghanistan stretched before them, beautiful and treacherous. Their first mission with the Special Forces team was to clear a suspected smuggling route. 20 minutes into the patrol, Hansen noticed the change. Taylor's ears pricked forward, her body language shifting subtly. The training kicked in, and he gave her the command to seek. She moved methodically at first, but then began circling without pinpointing a source. Frustration mounted as the patrol waited. "Your dog broken, Hansen?" one of the team sniped. Ignoring the comment, Hansen moved closer to Taylor, trying to read her behavior. That's when he saw it, the barely disturbed earth an inch from his boot. Later analysis would reveal a sophisticated IED buried deeper than most detection dogs could sense. One more step would have detonated it, taking Hansen and likely half the patrol with it. "I owe you a steak dinner," Hansen told Taylor that night, the gravity of their narrow escape settling in his bones. It became the first of their rituals. After every successful detection, a special reward. Sometimes it was a favorite toy, sometimes extra playtime, but always accompanied by Hansen's whispered affirmation. "We both go home today." The other handlers noticed the unusual bond forming, but said little. Results spoke for themselves, and the Hansen-Taylor team was quickly becoming known for having the highest detection rate in the region. Their morning ritual evolved naturally. Before each patrol, Hansen would kneel beside Taylor, rest his forehead briefly against hers, and murmur, "Find what's hidden, keep our guys safe." Taylor would remain perfectly still during this moment, a focus descending over her that the other handlers found almost eerie. One particularly superstitious Marine refused to go on patrol unless Hansen and Taylor had performed their ritual first. 6 months into deployment, a firefight erupted during what should have been a routine patrol. Hansen's first instinct was to protect Taylor, but in the chaos, they became separated. When the shooting finally stopped, Hansen searched frantically, finally discovering Taylor standing guard over a wounded soldier, refusing to let anyone approach, friend or foe, until Hansen arrived. The scene cemented their reputation. "That's not a dog," the unit commander said afterward. "That's a guardian angel with 4 paws and a fur coat." The depth of their connection manifested in unexpected ways. Taylor began sleeping positioned toward whatever direction Hansen would be patrolling the next day, as if instinctively orienting herself to his future safety. Hansen found himself able to read changes in Taylor's behavior that signaled potential threats long before they materialized. "It's like they're telepathic," a new handler remarked, watching them work. "Not telepathic," the training officer corrected. "Just something deeper than the training manual covers." By the end of their first year together, Hansen and Taylor had been responsible for detecting 17 IEDs, finding 3 weapons caches, and saving their unit from multiple ambushes. Intelligence officers began specifically requesting their team for high-risk operations. The pressure was immense, but in the quiet moments between missions, Hansen reading aloud from whatever paperback had made its way to their remote outpost while Taylor rested her head on his leg, both found an unexpected peace amidst the war. They had become more than handler and military working dog. They had become family. The news came on a sweltering Tuesday in their second year of deployment. Hansen had just returned from a successful morning patrol with Taylor, the German shepherd padding contentedly at his side after identifying a cleverly concealed weapons cache. Captain Reynolds summoned Hansen to his makeshift office, a dusty room with plywood walls and a desk fashioned from ammunition crates. "Medical report came back, Hansen," Reynolds said without preamble, sliding a folder across the desk. Hansen felt a cold weight settle in his stomach even before his fingers touched the paper. 3 concussions in 18 months. The last one, from a blast that had thrown him 20 feet despite Taylor's early warning, had left him unconscious for nearly 40 hours. The military doctor's recommendation was unambiguous: removal from combat duty, immediate evaluation at Walter Reed, potential medical discharge. "Sir, with all due respect," Hansen began, but Reynolds raised a hand. "This isn't a negotiation, Staff Sergeant. You've done exemplary work here, but the next blast might be the one that doesn't let you wake up." Reynolds' voice softened slightly. "We take care of our own, son. It's time to let someone else carry the load for a while." That night, Hansen sat outside the kennel area, Taylor's head heavy on his lap as he processed the implications. Leaving meant safety, medical care, perhaps even a chance at a life without the constant vigilance that had become second nature. But it also meant something that twisted his gut with an almost physical pain: separation from Taylor. "What do you think, girl?" he murmured, scratching behind her ears. "Think you'd like civilian life? Sleep on a real bed instead of this desert dust?" Taylor's amber eyes held his gaze with that penetrating intelligence that still sometimes startled him. She couldn't possibly understand the complexity of military regulations, yet something in her demeanor suggested a wariness, as if sensing the approaching change. The next morning, Hansen made his way to Major Williamson, the officer overseeing the military working dog program for their region. The major's office was marginally more formal than the captain's, an actual desk, walls covered with maps and commendations. Hansen stood at attention, though his head pounded with the lingering effects of his latest concussion. "At ease, Hansen," Williamson said, not looking up from his paperwork. "I'm guessing this is about the dog." "Yes, sir. I'd like to initiate adoption paperwork for Taylor." Now Williamson did look up, his weathered face unreadable. "You know the protocol. First handlers get first consideration when a dog retires." "Yes, sir. That's why I'm here." Williamson sighed, setting down his pen. "Taylor isn't retiring, Hansen. She's 3 years into what will likely be an 8 to 10-year career. Her detection rates are off the charts. If anything, her performance has improved since your partnership began." Hansen had anticipated this response, but hearing it aloud still hit like a physical blow. "Sir, we've worked together for nearly 2 years. The bond is precisely why she's so effective," Williamson interrupted. "You've done outstanding work training her, Hansen. That training will continue to save lives long after you've recovered at Walter Reed." For a moment, Hansen considered arguing further, explaining how Taylor woke before his nightmares fully formed, how she positioned herself between him and doorways in new environments, how they had developed a communication that transcended commands. But the tightness in Williamson's jaw told him the decision was already made. In the calculus of war, Taylor's skills outweighed the bond they'd formed. She was, in the military's eyes, equipment, exceptionally valuable equipment. "Who will she be reassigned to, sir?" Hansen managed to ask, his voice carefully controlled. "Sergeant Michael Foster. Good handler, multiple tours. He lost his dog in that firefight near Kandahar last month." Hansen knew Foster, a competent handler with a solid reputation. It should have been reassuring. Instead, a hollow feeling expanded in his chest. "Request permission to oversee transition training, sir. Taylor can be particular about new handlers. Something like sympathy flickered across Williamson's face. "Granted, you have 2 weeks before your transport to Landstuhl. Make them count." Those 2 weeks became both blessing and torture. Hansen worked methodically with Foster, explaining Taylor's quirks and signals that weren't in any training manual. How 3 quick ear twitches meant she'd caught a scent but wasn't certain of the source yet. How she'd press slightly against his left leg when she sensed danger but hadn't pinpointed it. How she refused to eat in the first hour after waking unless the food was placed in the northwest corner of her dish. "She's not usually this cooperative with transition training," the kennel master observed on the 10th day, watching Taylor perform flawlessly under Foster's commands. "She understands duty," Hansen replied simply, though his throat ached with unspoken words. The night before his scheduled departure, Hansen broke protocol one final time. Using his override code, he let himself into Taylor's kennel area after lights out. The German Shepherd was awake, as if expecting him, her intelligent eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting. Hansen sat beside her, not speaking for a long while, his fingers working through her fur, memorizing the feel of it. "I'm not good at goodbyes," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Never have been. My dad says it's a family trait." Taylor shifted, resting her head on his thigh with a heavy sigh. "I've put in the paperwork already. Filed it every way possible. When you retire, if I'm still standing, I'm coming for you. That's a promise." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn bandana, the one he'd used to wipe dust from her eyes during their first sandstorm together. He'd washed it, but made sure it still carried his scent. Carefully, he tied it around her neck, underneath her official military collar. "Against regulations," he admitted with a sad smile, "but something to remember me by." The farewell ceremony was brief, military efficiency leaving little room for sentiment. Hansen stood at attention as Colonel Briggs presented him with a Purple Heart and commendation for his service. Taylor remained at Foster's side, the picture of canine discipline, though Hansen caught the slight tremor in her tail, a tell only he would recognize as agitation rather than excitement. The moment approached for Hansen to board the transport that would begin his journey home. Protocol dictated a clean break, no long goodbyes that might confuse the working dog. He saluted the assembled unit, turned crisply, and took 3 steps toward the waiting vehicle. "Hansen." Foster's voice stopped him. He turned to see the sergeant approaching. Taylor at his side. Foster's expression was unreadable, but he offered a short nod. 30 seconds, for morale. Relief and gratitude flooded through Hansen. He knelt as Foster stepped back, giving Taylor freedom to approach. For one terrible moment, she hesitated, and Hansen feared she might maintain her military bearing, denying them both this final connection. Then she surged forward, pressing against him with the familiar weight he'd come to depend on through firefights and lonely nights. "I meant what I said," he whispered against her fur, too softly for anyone else to hear. "Wait for me, I'll find you again." A sharp command from Foster brought Taylor reluctantly back to his side. Hansen rose, composing his features into the neutral expression expected of a soldier. He offered a final salute, which the unit returned, then turned and boarded the transport without looking back. Through the small window, as the vehicle pulled away, he caught a last glimpse of Taylor, still at perfect attention, but with her gaze fixed unwavering on the departing transport, the bandana just visible beneath her tactical collar. It was an image that would sustain and haunt him through the long months of rehabilitation ahead. The transition to civilian life hit Hansen like a physical blow. After the structured intensity of deployment, the ordinary rhythms of American life seemed surreal. Shopping malls filled with people who had never heard a mortar explosion, restaurants where no one scanned for exits or potential threats, nights where fireworks sent him diving for cover while bystanders stared in confusion. Walter Reed had patched his body, but the invisible wounds proved more stubborn. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by dreams where he searched endlessly for Taylor through blood-soaked mountain passes. During his waking hours, he found himself unconsciously reaching down to stroke fur that wasn't there, halting mid-sentence to share observations with a partner who had become an ocean and several deserts away. His parents' home in Ohio became both sanctuary and prison. They tried, in their way, to understand. His father, with the quiet solidarity of a fellow veteran, simply sat with him during the worst nights. His mother filled the house with the comfort foods of his childhood, her worried eyes following his too thin frame as he picked at meals without appetite. "It gets better," his father assured him one particularly bad morning, after Hansen had spent the night pacing the perimeter of their property, checking for threats that existed only in his memory. "Just takes time." But time seemed to move differently now, stretched and warped by the constant low-grade adrenaline that had become his baseline. The VA psychologist diagnosed him with PTSD, prescribing medications that dulled the worst edges but left him feeling disconnected from himself. "Have you considered getting a service dog?" she suggested during their third session, after Hansen explained how the absence of Taylor felt like a physical amputation. "There are programs specifically for veterans." He had considered it, but the thought of replacing Taylor with another dog felt like betrayal. "I already have a dog," he told her, his voice flat. "She's just still working." 6 months into his recovery, Hansen received an unexpected package from Afghanistan. Inside, he found a dust-covered tennis ball with tooth marks and a brief note from Foster. "She still doesn't fetch for me. Thought you might want this." The simple gesture broke something open in Hansen's chest. That night, he sat on his parents' back porch, rolling the worn ball between his palms, and finally allowed himself to weep, for the men he'd lost, for the innocence that wouldn't return, and for the partner who had carried half his burden without complaint. The following week, he applied for a position with a Veterans Outreach program in Columbus. It wasn't the life he'd imagined for himself, but helping other returning soldiers navigate the bureaucratic labyrinth of VA benefits gave him purpose. He moved into a small apartment that allowed pets. "For when she comes home," he explained to the puzzled property manager, and began the slow process of rebuilding. It was at a veterans support group that Hansen first met Emily Donner. She had returned from her final tour as a field medic 6 months earlier and was now working at the VA hospital while studying to become a physical therapist. With her practical approach to healing and absolute refusal to treat veterans with kid gloves, she brought a welcome directness to the group's sometimes circuitous conversations. "You check the whereabouts of your dog more often than most parents check on their kids," she observed after a meeting, falling into step beside Hansen as he walked to his car. He had just finished making his weekly call to Foster, who had taken to sending short updates despite the unusual nature of the arrangement. "Taylor's not just a dog," Hansen replied, defensive edges rising automatically. Emily's expression softened slightly. "I know. I was there, remember? Our unit wouldn't have made it through that Helmand province nightmare without you two." She paused, then added more gently, "I just think maybe you're putting your life on hold while you wait." Though initially bristling at her assessment, Hansen found himself accepting when Emily invited him for coffee the following week. Their conversation flowed with surprising ease, the shared language of deployment creating shortcuts in understanding that civilians couldn't navigate. When he mentioned his worry about Taylor's latest assignment in a particularly volatile region, Emily didn't dismiss it or offer empty reassurances. Instead, she simply reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. "She's the best at what she does, and she has someone to come back to. That matters." Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and the particular intimacy that comes from understanding each other's nightmares without explanation. Emily never pushed him to move faster than he was ready for, and when he finally invited her to his apartment after 2 months of dating, she said nothing about the dog bed positioned optimistically in the corner, or the cabinet dedicated to canine supplies. Instead, she brought over a book on canine PTSD. "For when she comes home," she said, with a certainty that made his throat tight with gratitude. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Taylor continued her dangerous work with a new handler. Foster's updates, though professional in tone, painted a picture that troubled Hansen deeply. Taylor was performing her duties flawlessly. Her detection rate remained extraordinary, but something had changed. She had become mechanical in her responses, completing tasks with precision, but without the eager intelligence that had been her hallmark. She refused bonding behaviors with Foster. maintaining a strict working relationship that never crossed into the companionship she had shared with Hansen. What Hansen didn't know, what Foster's carefully worded messages omitted, was the full extent of what had happened 3 months after their separation. In a remote valley in the Kunar province, Taylor had given early warning of an ambush, saving most of the patrol. In the ensuing firefight, however, she had taken shrapnel to her left flank while shielding Foster from a grenade blast. The field medic had removed the largest fragments, but smaller pieces remained embedded too close to her spine for safe extraction in field conditions. On particularly cold mornings or after strenuous missions, Taylor now moved with a slight stiffness that hadn't been present before. The military veterinarians prescribed anti-inflammatory medications and noted in her file that her service life might need to be shortened. But with her exceptional detection skills still intact, retirement remained a distant consideration. Foster, recognizing the debt he owed the dog who had saved his life, did what he could to ease her discomfort, sneaking extra blankets into her kennel on cold nights, massaging her muscles after difficult terrain. But the bond that had existed with her first handler remained elusive. Back in the States, Hansen found unexpected purpose in a chance encounter. Walking through a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of Columbus, he heard a sound that stopped him cold, the distinctive whine of a dog in pain. Following the noise led him to an abandoned lot, where a boxer lay bleeding, a gunshot wound in its hind leg and rope burns around its neck, suggesting a grim history. Without hesitation, Hansen shed his jacket, carefully wrapped the trembling animal, and rushed to the nearest emergency vet clinic. "He's been through hell," the veterinarian said after stabilizing the dog. "Looks like he was used for fighting, then discarded when he wouldn't perform. Someone shot him when he tried to escape. The damage to his throat suggests he was kept chained and pulling against it for a long time." Hansen found himself staying through the surgery, then returning daily during the boxer's recovery. He named him Harley, after a buddy who hadn't made it home from Helmand province. When the clinic prepared to transfer Harley to a shelter, Hansen instead filled out adoption papers. "I've got experience with traumatized partners," he told the surprised vet tech. What he didn't share was the full truth behind the adoption. How Harley's scarred face had triggered a memory of finding a family photo in the pocket of a fallen soldier named James Harley. A photo that showed him kneeling beside a boxer puppy. The coincidence was almost certainly just that, but in the boxer's wary eyes, Hansen recognized a kindred spirit. Another warrior dealing with the aftermath of battles he'd never asked to fight. Rehabilitating Harley became an unexpected form of therapy. The boxer's initial fear of men, loud noises, and sudden movements mirrored Hansen's own hypervigilance in ways that created a peculiar empathy between them. On Harley's bad days, when the memory of abuse made him cower from even gentle hands, Hansen would simply sit nearby, reading aloud from whatever book he was currently working through. The same technique he had first used to gain Taylor's trust. On Hansen's bad days, when the world seemed too loud and unpredictable, Harley would press his solid weight against Hansen's legs, grounding him in the present moment. Emily, to Hansen's relief, understood immediately. "You're collecting strays," she observed the first time she met Harley, but her tone held warmth rather than judgment as she carefully let the nervous boxer sniff her hand. "He's lucky to have found you." "I think it might be the other way around," Hansen admitted. As Harley's physical wounds healed, his personality emerged, goofy and affectionate beneath the fear, with a particular fondness for stealing Hansen's socks and hiding them under the couch. Hansen found himself laughing for the first time in months, the sound almost startling after so long an absence. When he shared the story of Harley's progress during his next therapy session, his psychologist noted it was the first time she'd seen genuine animation in his expressions. "You're good for each other," she observed, "but I notice you still keep everything ready for Taylor's return." It was true. Despite Harley becoming an integral part of his daily life, Hansen maintained his ritual of checking for updates on Taylor, keeping her bed ready, researching the best techniques for integrating a former military working dog into civilian life. It wasn't that Harley was a placeholder. Hansen had grown to love the boxer deeply. But the promise he'd made to Taylor remained unfulfilled, a constant presence in his mind. What Hansen didn't yet know was that Taylor's situation had changed dramatically. After a particularly grueling mission in which she detected an unprecedented network of IEDs along the supply route, the military veterinarian had conducted a thorough examination and made a definitive recommendation: retirement within 6 months. The shrapnel near her spine had begun causing intermittent nerve pain, and while medication managed the symptoms, continuing high-stress deployment would eventually lead to permanent damage. For Foster, the news brought conflicting emotions. He had come to respect Taylor's abilities and understood better than most what her detection skills meant for the safety of their unit. Yet he had also witnessed her growing physical discomfort and the persistent emotional withdrawal that no amount of patient handling seemed to overcome. "She's done more than her share," he told the commanding officer. "She deserves to go home." The retirement process for military working dogs is typically straightforward. Handlers past and present can apply for adoption, with priority usually given to the most recent handler. Foster, however, made an unprecedented decision. Despite having worked with Taylor for nearly 18 months, he formally deferred his adoption rights to Hansen, attaching to his recommendation a detailed account of Taylor's service that emphasized the extraordinary bond she had shared with her first handler. "In my professional opinion," he wrote in the conclusion, "Taylor's transition to civilian life and recovery from service-related trauma would be most successful under the care of Staff Sergeant Hansen. Their connection transcends standard handler-canine dynamics and should be considered an exceptional case." The military bureaucracy, however, moves at its own pace. Foster's recommendation entered an administrative system already backlogged with personnel matters deemed more pressing than the retirement placement of a single working dog. The paperwork passed through multiple offices, was flagged for review due to its unusual nature, and ultimately landed on a desk in a corner of the Pentagon, where it sat unaddressed for weeks. Hansen, unaware of these developments, continued his gradual reintegration into civilian life. His work with the Veterans Outreach Program had expanded to include a support group specifically for former military dog handlers dealing with separation. The unexpected demand for such a specialized group revealed how many others shared his experience. The particular grief of leaving behind a partner who couldn't understand the reasons for abandonment. Emily had moved in with him, bringing a steadying presence to his still healing life. She never complained about the spare room that remained largely dedicated to Taylor. Photos of the German Shepherd arrayed on walls, specialized equipment accumulated for eventual needs, books on canine PTSD and rehabilitation stacked neatly on shelves. "Some people might find it odd," she told him one evening as they walked Harley through a nearby park, "but I think it's one of the things I love most about you. Your loyalty doesn't expire with distance or time." Hansen squeezed her hand, grateful yet again for her understanding. "I keep thinking about how confused she must be," he admitted. "Dogs don't understand deployment rotations or medical discharges. All she knows is that one day I was there, and the next I wasn't." Emily was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "Have you considered the possibility that she might not come back? Not because anything has happened to her, but because the military might assign her elsewhere after retirement." The thought had occurred to him during the darkest hours of night when doubts crowded closest. "I promised her," he said simply, "whatever it takes." The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, nearly 2 years after Hansen had last seen Taylor. He was at work, helping a recently returned Marine navigate the labyrinthine process of applying for educational benefits, when his cell phone vibrated against his desk. The number was unfamiliar, a military extension he didn't recognize. Excusing himself, Hansen stepped into the hallway, heart suddenly racing without knowing why. "Hansen," he answered, military brevity taking over unconsciously. "Staff Sergeant Hansen, this is Lieutenant Colonel Davies, Military Working Dog Program at Fort Benning." The voice was crisp, official. "I'm calling regarding MWD Taylor, identification number K435. Hansen's grip tightened on the phone. "Is she all right?" "She's being processed for retirement, Staff Sergeant. Her service record indicates you filed adoption paperwork approximately 21 months ago. I'm calling to confirm your continued interest." The world seemed to narrow to the sound of that voice, everything else fading to peripheral awareness. "Yes, sir. Absolutely. When?" There was a pause, the rustle of papers. "She's completed her final deployment and is currently at the MWD training facility in Missouri. Standard retirement processing takes 4 to 6 weeks. There are medical evaluations, decompression protocols, civilian behavior assessments." "I understand, sir. I'm familiar with the process." Hansen's mind was already racing ahead, arranging leave from work, preparing the house, researching veterinarians experienced with military working dogs. "There is another matter, Hansen." The lieutenant colonel's voice took on a more measured tone. "Taylor's final handler submitted an unusual addendum to her service record. Sergeant Foster has formally deferred his adoption rights and specifically recommended placement with you. However, there are complications." Hansen felt his chest tighten. "What kind of complications, sir?" "During her final deployment, Taylor sustained injuries that require ongoing medical care. She has shrapnel fragments too close to her spine for safe surgical removal. She's also displaying symptoms consistent with canine PTSD. The military veterinarians have prescribed a treatment regimen that would need to be continued under civilian care." The officer paused. "I should be clear, Staff Sergeant. This treatment is specialized and costly. The DoD covers medical expenses for active duty working dogs, but upon retirement, all costs transfer to the adopter." The implication was clear. Taylor's care would be expensive, potentially prohibitively so for someone on a Veterans Outreach Program salary. Hansen didn't hesitate. "That won't be a problem, sir." Additionally, there's the matter of transportation. Taylor would need to be accompanied by a handler familiar with her case from Missouri to your location in Ohio. The military can provide transportation to the nearest major military installation, but from there, responsibility would fall to you. Hansen's mind raced through calculations. The cost of flying to Missouri, renting a vehicle suitable for transporting a potentially reactive former military dog, hotel accommodations that would accept such an animal. His savings were modest. The medical discharge had come with benefits, but not wealth. The strain must have shown in his silence. "Staff Sergeant, are you still interested in pursuing adoption under these circumstances?" "Without question, sir," Hansen replied, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes, she's coming home." After ending the call, Hansen stood motionless in the hallway, emotions warring between elation and anxiety. Taylor was coming home. The mantra he'd repeated through countless dark nights was finally becoming reality. But the logistics loomed large. The specialized veterinary care alone would strain his budget, not to mention the immediate costs of transportation. For a moment, he considered asking his parents for a loan, but quickly dismissed the idea. His father's recent knee replacement had already depleted their modest retirement savings. That evening, Hansen laid out the situation for Emily with the direct assessment of a tactical briefing. She listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. "We'll make it work," she said when he'd finished. "I've got some savings set aside for graduate school that I can defer. Between that and what you've saved, we should be able to cover the initial expenses." Hansen shook his head firmly. "I can't let you do that. This is my responsibility." Emily's gaze hardened slightly, the same expression she'd worn in field hospitals when stubborn soldiers refused necessary treatment. "Tom Hansen, in what universe do you think I'd let you do this alone? Taylor isn't just your responsibility anymore. She's family, our family." The simple declaration left Hansen momentarily speechless. Despite their relationships deepening over the past year, a part of him had held back, unwilling to fully accept that his life could accommodate both his commitment to Taylor and a future with Emily. Her matter-of-fact inclusion of Taylor in their shared family unit dismantled that final barrier. Even with their combined resources, however, the financial strain would be significant. The specialized veterinarian recommended by the military program charged consultation fees that made Hansen wince, and the transportation logistics remained daunting. He spent late nights researching options, calling rental car companies about their pet policies, comparing hotel rates along potential routes from Missouri to Ohio. "There has to be a better way," Emily said one night, finding him still awake at 2 a.m., spreadsheets of calculations illuminated by the blue glow of his laptop. What about some kind of veterans organization that might help? I've looked into it, Hansen replied, rubbing his eyes. Most of the transport assistance programs are already oversubscribed, with waiting lists months long. Taylor's retirement is processing now. I don't want to risk any delays. 3 days later, Hansen was at the VA hospital for his monthly check-in when his phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Call me ASAP. Good news." Stepping out of the waiting room, he dialed her number. "I found someone," Emily said without preamble. Her name is Molly Oliver. She's a flight attendant with United Airlines who helps transport retired military dogs to their handlers. A guy in my physical therapy program works at the airport and overheard me talking about Taylor. He said this woman has done it multiple times, all at her own expense. Hansen felt a surge of cautious hope. Sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? No catch. She's the real deal. Apparently, she has a brother who served in Iraq and worked with military dogs. This is her way of giving back. Emily paused. I've already reached out to her. She wants to talk to you directly. That evening, Hansen found himself on the phone with Molly Oliver, a woman whose cheerful voice belied the seriousness with which she approached her self-appointed mission. For nearly an hour, she asked detailed questions about Taylor, her training, her injuries, her temperament, making notes that would help her prepare for the transport. I've done this 3 times before, she explained. Each dog is different, especially ones coming back from deployment. Some need quiet, some need constant reassurance. The airlines have procedures for service animals, but military working dogs are a special case. I've learned to work the system a bit. Why are you doing this? Hansen couldn't help asking. You don't know me or Taylor. There was a pause on the line. My brother David was a Marine. His unit worked with a bomb detection dog named Rex in Fallujah. Rex found an IED that would have taken out their entire patrol. 6 months later, my brother was killed by a sniper, but those extra 6 months meant he got to meet his daughter before he died. Her voice remained steady, but Hansen could hear the emotion beneath her words. I couldn't save David, but I can help bring these dogs home to the people who love them. The simple explanation struck Hansen with its raw honesty. I don't know how to thank you. Just be there when we land, Molly replied. These reunions are thanks enough. With transport suddenly arranged, the remaining obstacles seemed manageable. Emily helped Hansen set up a crowdfunding page for Taylor's ongoing medical expenses, sharing it through veterans networks and her hospital connections. To his surprise, donations began flowing in immediately. Many from former handlers who understood the unique bond, others from civilians moved by Taylor's service record, which Emily had carefully summarized. People want to help, she told Hansen, as they watched the total climb steadily. You're not in this alone. The night before Molly was scheduled to fly to Missouri, Hansen found himself unable to sleep. He sat in the spare room that had become a shrine of sorts to Taylor, running his fingers over the tactical vest he'd kept as a tangible connection to their shared past. Harley, sensing his restlessness, padded into the room and settled against his leg with a heavy sigh. Big changes coming, buddy, Hansen murmured, scratching the boxer's ears. You ready to meet your sister? Harley thumped his tail against the floor, a gesture of simple canine support that somehow eased the tangle of emotions in Hansen's chest. He had spent countless hours preparing for this reunion, reading books on canine PTSD, consulting with veterinary behaviorists, rearranging the house to create a quiet space where Taylor could decompress. Yet beneath the practical preparations lay a deeper worry that he rarely voiced even to Emily. The fear that too much had changed, that the Taylor returning to him might be a shadow of the partner he remembered. The texts from Molly began early the next morning. A photo of her boarding pass, a message that she'd arrived at the MWD facility, a brief note that she'd met Taylor, and all was proceeding as planned. Then, silence for several hours, the period when Taylor would be undergoing her final veterinary check and formal release from military service. Hansen and Emily arrived at the Columbus airport 2 hours before the scheduled landing, too keyed up to wait at home any longer. They found a quiet corner of the arrivals area, away from the busiest foot traffic. Hansen had brought Taylor's old tennis ball, the one Foster had sent, rolling it unconsciously between his palms, as he had done countless times during their separation. What if she doesn't remember me? He finally voiced the fear that had been growing as the moment of reunion approached. Emily's hand found his, stilling the nervous movement. She'll remember, she said with quiet certainty. The bond you two had doesn't just disappear. When the flight status change to arrived, Hansen felt the same surge of adrenaline he'd experienced before combat operations. A heightened awareness where every sense seemed sharper, every moment stretched and significant. Passengers began trickling through the arrival gate. Business travelers and families collecting luggage and greeting waiting loved ones. Then, at the edge of the crowd, he spotted her, Molly Oliver, recognizable from the photos she'd sent, her flight attendant's uniform crisp despite the long journey. And beside her, moving with the measured pace of a dog still on duty, was a black and tan German shepherd with a gray-flecked muzzle and alert ears. Taylor. Hansen found himself moving forward without conscious decision, weaving through the crowd until he was close enough to see the recognition dawn in those familiar amber eyes. He dropped to one knee, overcome with emotion, and spoke her name for the first time outside of dreams in nearly 2 years. What happened next would be forever etched in his memory. Taylor's measured pace breaking into an eager rush, her body pressing against his with the same solid warmth he'd relied upon through firefights and long desert nights. Her soft whine of recognition, more eloquent than any human language. Hansen buried his face in her fur, murmuring the words he'd saved for this moment. "You're home, girl. We both made it home." The honeymoon period of Taylor's homecoming lasted precisely 36 hours. Hansen had taken 2 weeks off work to help with her transition, and the first day and a half unfolded like a dream. Taylor following him from room to room, reacquainting herself with civilian life, cautiously accepting Emily's gentle overtures of friendship, and even showing tentative curiosity about Harley's enthusiastic but respectful advances. Hansen began to believe that perhaps the warnings about difficult adjustments had been overstated in Taylor's case. After all, they had always shared a connection that defied conventional handler-dog dynamics. Then came the thunderstorm. It rolled in just after midnight, a spring deluge that illuminated the bedroom in staccato flashes of lightning followed by rumbling thunder that rattled the windows. Hansen woke to a sound he hadn't heard since Afghanistan, Taylor's combat alert, a low, intense growl that had once signaled imminent threat. He found her rigid beside the bed, hackles raised, eyes fixed on the window where rain lashed against the glass. "It's okay, girl," he murmured, reaching out slowly. "Just a storm. We're home." Taylor's response chilled him to the core. She backed away from his outstretched hand, her body language transforming from alert to defensive. When lightning flashed again, accompanied by a particularly loud thunderclap, she bolted. Not under the bed or into a corner as a frightened pet might, but into the hallway, where she took up a tactical position with sight lines to both exits, her training taking over where trust failed. It took nearly 3 hours of patient coaxing before she would allow Hansen close enough to touch her, and even then, she remained on high alert until the storm passed. The incident was merely the first indication of a harsh reality. The Taylor who had returned to him carried invisible wounds far deeper than her physical injuries. The following days revealed the full extent of the challenges they faced. Routine household sounds, the garbage disposal, the furnace cycling on, a car backfiring on their street, could trigger Taylor's hypervigilance. During walks, she would sometimes freeze, her attention locked on a pattern in the sidewalk that to her combat-trained senses resembled the distinctive disruption of buried explosives. Most concerning to Hansen were the moments when she seemed to look through him rather than at him, her mind clearly back in the war zone they'd shared. The specialized veterinarian, Dr. Marissa Caldwell, didn't sugarcoat the diagnosis during their first consultation. "Taylor is exhibiting classic symptoms of canine PTSD," she explained, reviewing the notes from the military veterinarians. "The hypervigilance, startle response, and dissociative episodes are all consistent with trauma exposure. The shrapnel near her spine is likely exacerbating these issues by causing intermittent pain that further triggers her stress response." But she knows she's safe now, Hansen insisted, watching Taylor where she lay at his feet, temporarily calm in the familiar position she'd once taken during mission briefings. She knows she's with me. Dr. Caldwell's expression softened with sympathy. The rational part of her brain may recognize that, but trauma responses bypass rationality, their survival mechanisms encoded at a much more primitive level. She leaned forward slightly. And Staff Sergeant, there's something else you should be prepared for. The military veterinarians noted degenerative changes in her spinal MRIs consistent with the shrapnel migration. It's not immediately life-threatening, but it does mean her condition is likely to worsen over time. How much time? Hansen asked, the question hanging heavy in the sterile examination room. Without surgical intervention, which carries its own significant risks at her age, we're looking at perhaps a year before mobility issues become severe. With proper pain management and physical therapy, maybe 2. The diagnosis hit Hansen like a physical blow. After 2 years of separation, after overcoming every obstacle to bring Taylor home, their reunion would be brief, another cruel twist in a journey already marked by too many hardships. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Hansen sat on the living room floor beside Taylor's bed, his hand resting lightly on her flank, where he could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was apologizing for. Sending her back into combat with a new handler, not being there when she was injured, or simply for the fundamental unfairness of a world where loyal service was rewarded with physical pain and nightmares. Taylor shifted slightly, pressing against his hand in a gesture that felt like absolution he didn't deserve. Emily found them there in the morning, Hansen having fallen asleep sitting up, his hand still protectively placed on Taylor's side. Without comment, she brought him coffee and sat beside him on the floor, her presence a silent bulwark against the tide of grief threatening to pull him under. "I can't lose her again," Hansen finally said, his voice rough with emotion and lack of sleep. "Not when I just got her back." "Then we make the most of whatever time we have," Emily replied with the pragmatic compassion that had seen her through battlefield triage, "and we fight for every extra day." The weeks that followed established new rhythms in their household. Hansen converted the spare bedroom into what Emily jokingly called Taylor's Rehabilitation Center. Complete with orthopedic bedding, ramps to reduce strain on her joints, and the specialized equipment recommended by Dr. Caldwell. Emily's medical background proved invaluable as she mastered the physical therapy exercises designed to maintain Taylor's mobility, incorporating them into daily routines that came to feel like rituals of devotion. Yet for all their efforts, Taylor's condition followed the predicted course. Good days, when she moved with something close to her former fluid grace, were interspersed with increasingly frequent bad days when pain made her movements stiff and hesitant. The nightmares, too, continued. Moments when she would wake whimpering from sleep, her body trembling with the memory of explosions and gunfire that Hansen could not shield her from. The emotional toll on Hansen manifested in unexpected ways. His own PTSD symptoms, which had gradually improved over the past year, returned with renewed intensity. Emily woke more than once to find him conducting perimeter checks of their property at 3 a.m. Hypervigilance, triggered by Taylor's distress. During a session with his VA psychologist, Hansen finally voiced the guilt that had been growing since Taylor's return. "I promised I'd protect her," he said, staring at his clenched hands. "In Afghanistan, that's what we did, protected each other. But I can't protect her from this." "Protection isn't always about prevention," the psychologist suggested gently. "Sometimes it's about presence, being there through the hard parts when prevention isn't possible." The perspective helped somewhat, but couldn't entirely dissolve the knot of responsibility Hansen felt. He found himself obsessively researching experimental treatments, alternative therapies, anything that might extend Taylor's comfort and mobility. Emily supported his efforts, but also provided necessary reality checks, her medical training allowing her to separate promising approaches from false hope. "We need to be careful that we're not prolonging her life at the expense of her quality of life," she reminded him after he'd spent hours researching an experimental surgical technique that carried significant risks. Whatever decisions we make need to be for her benefit, not for ours. The truth of her words stung, forcing Hansen to confront the possibility that his determination to keep Taylor with him might eventually conflict with what was best for her. It was a calculus he had performed countless times in combat, weighing risk against benefit, making hard choices with limited information, but never with stakes that felt so personally devastating. One particularly difficult evening, after helping Taylor navigate the 3 steps from their back door to the yard, a journey that had once been effortless but now required careful support, Hansen found himself overwhelmed by a wave of futility. He sat heavily on the back porch steps, watching as Taylor carefully surveyed the familiar territory of their small yard. Her movements dignified despite their limitation. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," he admitted to Emily, who had quietly joined him on the steps, watching her fight so hard just to do things that used to be second nature. Emily's hand found his, squeezing gently. "You're focusing on what she's lost," she observed. "But look at what she still has. A home, purpose, your love. Those aren't small things, Tom. Especially for a dog who spent years in a war zone." As if to underscore her point, Taylor completed her careful circuit of the yard and made her way back to them, settling with a soft grunt at Hansen's feet, her head resting across his boot in a gesture of trust that spoke volumes. In that moment, despite the pain of watching her struggle, Hansen recognized the privilege of being the one she returned to, the shelter she sought when her world had narrowed to manageable geography and familiar faces. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said finally, reaching down to stroke the graying fur around her muzzle. "However many days that turns out to be." Hansen's journey to discovering the full truth about Taylor's service began unexpectedly, with the arrival of a padded manila envelope bearing an official military postmark. Inside was a weathered logbook and a brief note from Lieutenant Colonel Davies, found during standard file transfers. "Thought you might want this." The logbook was Taylor's official service record, typically retained by the military, with detailed entries from each handler who had worked with her, including mission reports, behavioral observations, and medical incidents. Hansen sat at the kitchen table late into the night, carefully turning pages that documented the professional history of his partner. He had known, of course, about her exceptional detection statistics, had lived through many of the missions described in the earlier entries. What he hadn't known, what Foster had never mentioned in his updates, was the extent of Taylor's heroism after their separation. The entry dated 3 months after Hansen's departure described the incident in clinical military terms. MWD Taylor alerted to presence of enemy combatants in ridge position above patrol route. Handler initially questioned alert due to lack of visual confirmation. MWD refused to proceed, physically blocking Handler from potential line of fire. Subsequent engagement confirmed presence of enemy sniper team. During firefight, MWD Taylor sustained shrapnel wounds protecting Handler from grenade fragmentation. The official commendation attached to the report had been signed by a general. MWD Taylor's actions directly resulted in the survival of her handler and 6 additional personnel. Her injury was sustained during an act of extraordinary courage inconsistent with standard training protocols. Hansen read the words again, his vision blurring slightly. The standard training protocols for military working dogs emphasize their value as detection tools and the importance of handlers maintaining control. What Taylor had done, physically preventing Foster from walking into a sniper's sights, then shielding him from explosion fragments with her own body, went beyond training. It was a conscious choice that spoke to an intelligence and loyalty that the military bureaucracy could acknowledge but never fully comprehend. The discovery prompted Hansen to dig deeper. Using his contacts from the Veterans Outreach Program, he tracked down Foster's current posting, a training role at Fort Bragg. The phone call was initially awkward, both men measuring their words carefully, united by their connection to Taylor, but separated by the complicated dynamics of handlers sharing the same working dog. "I should have told you about the injury when it happened," Foster acknowledged after preliminary small talk had been exhausted. "Command advised against it, said it would only cause unnecessary distress since you couldn't be there. But that's a poor excuse. I understand operational security, Hansen replied, though the knowledge that Taylor had been wounded without his awareness still stung. I'm not calling to place blame. He paused, searching for words. I need to understand what she went through to help her now. Something in Foster's voice shifted, the professional reserve giving way to genuine emotion. How is she? The simple question opened a floodgate. For nearly an hour, the two men spoke with the unique shorthand of those who had shared the same remarkable partner, comparing notes on Taylor's quirks and preferences, laughing over her stubborn insistence on certain routines, sobering when the conversation turned to her current health challenges. There's something else you should know, Foster said finally, his tone regaining its professional distance. After that ambush where she was injured, something changed. She started showing signs of what the vets called conflict behavior. Hesitation before entering certain areas, increased startle response. The military working dog program doesn't have much patience for that kind of thing. There was talk of washing her out entirely. But they didn't, Hansen observed, thinking of the additional year Taylor had served. No, they didn't, Foster confirmed, because despite everything, her detection rates never dropped. She was still performing her primary function flawlessly. But, he paused. I knew she was pushing through fear to do it. You could see it in her eyes, determination overriding instinct. I've never seen anything like it, before or since. Hansen's throat tightened with a complex mix of pride and sorrow. Why didn't you adopt her yourself when retirement came? You worked with her longer than I did in the end. Foster's response came without hesitation. Because every night in Afghanistan, she slept with her head pointed toward the east. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Then one of the other handlers mentioned, that's the direction of your posting in Ohio. There was a rueful smile in his voice. She was always waiting for you to come back, Hansen. I was just keeping her safe until you could. The revelation settled something in Hansen's chest. A question he hadn't fully articulated even to himself about whether his determination to reunite with Taylor had been selfish, imposing human sentimentality on an animal that had simply moved on with a new handler. Foster's observation suggested something deeper had been at work. A mutual waiting. A faith kept on both sides. With Foster's permission, Hansen arranged to meet Taylor's secondary handler from their original deployment, a Marine named Rodriguez, who had occasionally worked with her when Hansen was assigned to other duties. Now retired and living in Cincinnati just 2 hours from Columbus, Rodriguez agreed to visit the following weekend. The reunion between Taylor and Rodriguez highlighted another facet of her remarkable nature. Though clearly recognizing him, her tail wagging with understated enthusiasm, she maintained a respectful distance until Hansen gave a subtle nod of approval. Only then did she approach Rodriguez for a proper greeting, accepting his affectionate ear scratches while maintaining physical contact with Hansen's leg. Still the diplomat, Rodriguez observed with a grin. She always knew exactly how much leeway she had with each person in the unit, smart as a whip. Over lunch in Hansen's backyard, Rodriguez shared stories that filled gaps in Hansen's understanding of Taylor's service, small moments of brilliance or humor that hadn't made it into official reports. But it was what he revealed about their final days together in Afghanistan that proved most illuminating. That last week before your medical evacuation, she knew something was wrong, Rodriguez said, watching Taylor where she lay in a patch of sunlight nearby. You were trying to hide those headaches, but she wasn't fooled. Started positioning herself between you and any loud noises, guiding you away from bright sunlight when your eyes were sensitive. The guys noticed, but nobody said anything because, well, you know how it is. Nobody wants to be the one to sideline another operator. The observation struck Hansen with the force of revelation. He had attributed his successful concealment of concussion symptoms to his own stoicism, never considering that Taylor had been actively compensating for his deficits, subtly guiding him until proper medical attention became unavoidable. She was taking care of me, he said quietly. All that time I thought I was protecting her. Rodriguez nodded. That's the thing about the best working dogs. The line between handler and dog blurs after a while. You become a single unit. After Rodriguez departed, Hansen found himself watching Taylor with new eyes. seeing beyond her current physical limitations to the extraordinary intelligence and devotion that had characterized her entire life. That evening, as he helped her settle into her bed, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. One that Emily, dozing on the couch after a long hospital shift, nearly missed. For the first time since her return, Taylor initiated their old pre-mission ritual. As Hansen knelt beside her to adjust her orthopedic bedding, she pressed her forehead briefly against his, in the gesture that had once preceded every patrol. The simple action, performed with deliberate intent, spoke volumes about her gradual psychological healing, her reconnection not just with Hansen as her handler, but with their shared history of trust and partnership. "Emily," Hansen called softly, not wanting to break the moment but needing to share it. She remembered. Emily blinked awake, quickly grasping the significance as Taylor maintained the gentle contact, her amber eyes holding Hansen's gaze with the same focused intelligence that had once detected hidden threats in Afghan mountain passes. Now that keen awareness was turned toward something equally important, rebuilding the connection that war and separation had strained but never broken. "I told you she would," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion as she witnessed the silent communication passing between man and dog, a language developed through shared danger and mutual protection that needed no translation. That night, for the first time since her return, Taylor slept soundly through until morning. No nightmares, no restless vigilance. Hansen, too, found a deeper rest than he had known in years, as if some essential circuit had been reconnected, allowing both of them to finally stand down from a mission that had extended far beyond its official parameters. The creation of Taylor's bucket list began as Emily's idea, proposed one morning over coffee as Hansen contemplated the veterinarian's most recent prognosis. "We can't change how much time she has," Emily said, watching Taylor doze in the patch of sunlight streaming through their kitchen window. "But we can make sure every day counts." Together, they compiled a list tailored to Taylor's unique history and preferences, visits to open spaces where she could safely explore without a leash, trips to the nearby lake where she had shown unexpected delight in wading through shallow water, quiet evenings with special treats and gentle grooming sessions that soothed her aging muscles. Hansen added items drawn from their shared past, reading aloud from his dog-eared copy of The Old Man and the Sea, just as he had during their initial bonding, playing modified versions of the scent detection games that had once been work, but could now be enjoyed as pure recreation. What began as a private family project unexpectedly expanded when Molly Oliver, who had remained in contact since facilitating Taylor's homecoming, mentioned it on her social media accounts. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Former military handlers, veterans groups, and ordinary citizens touched by Taylor's story began sending suggestions and offering experiences. A retired K-9 officer invited them to his rural property, where Taylor could experience the freedom of wide-open fields without triggering her hypervigilance. A local restaurant created Taylor's special, a K-9-friendly meal of lean steak and sweet potatoes, and reserved a quiet corner table where Hansen could bring her during off-peak hours. "I never expected this," Hansen admitted to Emily as they sorted through another batch of letters and small packages that had arrived for Taylor. "All these people connecting with her story. She represents something important," Emily replied, watching as Taylor carefully inspected a handmade toy sent by a fourth-grade class in Nebraska. Loyalty that survives separation, courage in the face of trauma. People need those reminders, especially now. The calendar they created to track Taylor's bucket list adventures soon filled their refrigerator door, each completed activity marked with a paw print sticker that Harley often tried to sniff or lick whenever the refrigerator was opened. The boxer had developed his own unique relationship with Taylor, part respectful deference to her seniority, part protective concern as he often positioned himself between her and potential stressors like delivery personnel or unfamiliar sounds. "He's learned from the best," Hansen observed one evening, watching Harley gently herd Taylor away from the front door when a particularly loud group of children passed by on the sidewalk. "She's teaching him to be a service dog in her own way." As Taylor's body gradually yielded to the inevitable progression of her injuries, Hansen found himself leaning more heavily on the support network that had formed around them. Foster visited twice, each time bringing small comforts for Taylor. A particular type of brush she had favored during their deployment together. A worn tennis ball that still carried the scent of the Afghan mountains. Rodriguez organized a reunion with several members of their original unit, a quiet gathering in Hansen's backyard, where Taylor received the same respectful acknowledgement given to any decorated veteran. Perhaps most surprising was Hansen's own healing, which seemed to accelerate alongside Taylor's physical decline. The nightmares that had plagued him since Afghanistan grew less frequent than rare. The hypervigilance that had once made public spaces nearly unbearable faded to manageable awareness. His VA psychologist noted the change during their monthly session. "You're processing your experiences differently," she observed. "What's changed?" Hansen considered the question carefully. "I think I'm seeing things through Taylor's perspective. She's in pain, she has every reason to be fearful, but she still finds joy in small moments. She's teaching me how to carry the weight of what happened without being crushed by it." The psychologist nodded. "That's a profound insight. Many combat veterans struggle with feeling that their trauma defines them. Taylor doesn't have that luxury. She lives fully in the present, despite her past. There's a valuable lesson there." Indeed, Taylor's approach to her diminishing mobility became a daily master class in adaptation and resilience. When climbing the 3 back steps became too difficult, she discovered she could navigate around the side of the house to the front entrance, which had only a small threshold. When her favorite sunbathing spot in the yard became too distant a journey, she found an equally satisfying location on the covered porch. Each adjustment was made without complaint, each limitation accommodated with a quiet dignity that humbled those watching her. "She makes me want to be a better person," Emily confessed to Hansen late one night, after they had helped Taylor through a particularly difficult episode of pain. "More patient, more present. She has that effect on people," Hansen agreed, thinking of the transformation he'd witnessed in himself and others who had been touched by Taylor's steadfast spirit. As summer yielded to fall, Taylor's good days became less frequent, though no less precious. Hansen adjusted his work schedule to be home more, coordinating with Emily to ensure that Taylor was rarely alone. They developed systems for managing her increasing physical needs. Special harnesses that distributed weight away from her sensitive areas, carefully timed medications that balanced pain control against mental clarity, environmental modifications that allowed her continued independence even as her mobility decreased. One crisp October morning, Hansen took Taylor to a small, secluded meadow that had become a favorite spot on her bucket list. The location was perfect, open enough to satisfy her need for visibility, private enough to prevent unwanted interactions, beautiful enough to nourish the soul. Taylor moved slowly but purposefully, her nose working the breeze, cataloging information in the way that had once safeguarded lives in a combat zone, but now simply enriched her sensory experience. They settled together beneath an oak tree, its leaves turned golden in the autumn sunlight. Taylor rested against Hansen's side, her breathing steady, her gaze alert but peaceful. In that moment of quiet communion, Hansen felt a certainty settle over him. Regardless of how many days remained, they had achieved what once seemed impossible. They had found their way back to each other across time and distance, had rebuilt what war and separation had threatened to destroy. "We made it, girl," he murmured, his hand resting lightly on her flank, where he could feel the steady rhythm of her heart. The mission's complete. Taylor's final weeks were marked by a gentle decline rather than a crisis, a gradual letting go that allowed for proper goodbyes. Hansen and Emily had made arrangements with Dr. Caldwell for home euthanasia when the time came, determined to spare Taylor the stress of a final clinic visit. The decision about timing was one Hansen approached with the same thoughtful assessment he had once applied to tactical situations, watching closely for signs that Taylor's quality of life had diminished beyond what her dignity could bear. The moment arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning when Taylor attempted to rise from her bed but lacked the strength to stand even with assistance. The look she gave Hansen held neither fear nor confusion, only a calm acceptance and perhaps a question. Ready for one more mission together? Hansen made the call to Dr. Caldwell, then sat beside Taylor on the floor, Emily joining them in the peaceful circle of companionship that had become their family unit. Harley seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, positioning himself protectively at Taylor's back, his normally exuberant energy subdued to gentle presence. When Dr. Caldwell arrived, she moved with quiet efficiency, explaining each step as Hansen stroked Taylor's fur and murmured the reassurances that had carried them through firefights and thunderstorms alike. "I'm right here. We're safe. We both go home today." Taylor's passing was peaceful, a gentle transition marked by the slowing of her breath and the gradual relaxing of muscles long held tense against pain. Hansen remained with her until the end and beyond, his forehead pressed against hers in their final mission ritual, grateful through his grief for the privilege of being the one to see her safely through this last passage. In the days that followed, condolences arrived from around the country. Former handlers, veterans whose lives had been saved by similar working dogs, ordinary citizens touched by Taylor's story of service and loyalty. Molly Oliver helped organize a memorial service that honored both the military working dog, who had saved countless lives, and the beloved companion who had taught valuable lessons about healing and resilience. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came in the form of a foundation established in Taylor's name, a nonprofit dedicated to reuniting retired military working dogs with their handlers and supporting their often complex medical needs. With Molly's organizational skills, Emily's medical expertise, and Hansen's first-hand understanding of the unique bond between handlers and their canine partners, the Taylor Foundation quickly became a respected resource within the veteran community. "She's still saving lives," Emily observed 6 months later, showing Hansen a letter from a former handler whose service dog had recently been brought home through their assistance. "Just in a different way now." Hansen nodded, his gaze falling on the photograph that held pride of place on their living room wall. Taylor in her prime, alert and powerful beside a younger version of himself in the Afghan mountains. Beside it hung a second image, Taylor in her final days, gray-muzzled but serene in the autumn meadow, her mission completed, her legacy secure. "That's the thing about the best partners," he said quietly. "They never really leave you. They just lead the way home." In the twilight of life, it's not the battles we've fought or the accolades we've earned that matter most. It's the faithful companions who've walked beside us through darkness and light. Staff Sergeant Hansen and Taylor remind us that true bonds transcend words, time, and even the ravages of war. Their story speaks to the sacred covenant between those who serve and those who wait, between promise made and promise kept. As we age, we understand more deeply what Taylor embodied: dignity in the face of pain, adaptation without complaint, and finding joy in diminished circumstances. Her legacy teaches us that our worth isn't measured by our physical capabilities, but by the love we give and receive. When Hansen whispered, "We both go home today," he spoke a universal truth, that home isn't a place but a connection, a belonging that neither separation nor suffering can diminish. In your own autumn seasons, remember Taylor's lesson. It's never too late to complete the mission of coming home to those who've waited faithfully for your return. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.